Okay, let's start. So first up is Kimberly.
Hi, greetings. My name is Kimberly Tanner. I'm a professor of biology at San Francisco State University. I go by she and her pronouns. And an important thing to know about me, I'm a neuroscientist by training, so I think a lot about biology education research in terms of my original training with the brain. I'm a first-generation college-going student, and I think that's the primary motivator of why I do this kind of work. And one piece of advice I have for folks is, as stressful as it may be, to think about where you want to be in 3 or 4 years and work backwards from that to figure out what you want to learn to get yourself there. That's my piece of advice. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. Next up is Tessa.
Hi, my name is Tessa Andrews. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Genetics at the University of Georgia. And my background is in sort of evolution and genetics, but I started doing education research as a graduate student and then transitioned to a postdoc that was solely education research with Erin Dolan as my advisor. And then I pursued faculty positions that allowed me to focus on that alone. I liked the question about what you value, and I think COVID has made increasingly clear to me that I value people and great collaborations, and that is what makes my job awesome. And I think the advice that I would give is to read a lot. So transitioning into DBER means you have a whole new set of literature to grow acquainted with, and I would challenge you to read beyond the DBER literature into the sort of discoveries that have been made in K-12 science education, which has a really rich history, as well as maybe organizational learning or other areas that are relevant to whatever aspect of DBER is interesting to you.
Okay, thank you. Next is Erin.
Hi there, I'm Erin Dolan. I'm a professor in biochemistry at the University of Georgia. I got interested in DBER myself because I was struck that I didn't really understand what research was until about my 3rd year of grad school. And yet I noticed that many scientists expect people to make decisions based on evidence, and we give students very little chance to do that in our instruction. So I was interested in scalable ways of involving students in the kinds of work we do as scientists. I also appreciated the question about values, and I think that I value kindness, I value fairness, and I value usefulness, and I think DBER really gives me an opportunity to express those values in my work every day. My one piece of advice is if you're to look at what jobs you're interested in pursuing, and then whether a DBER postdoc would be a good fit. So talking to people who have the kind of jobs you're interested in, and then asking them how they got there, and then evaluating whether a DBER postdoc is a good fit before you invest.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Couch. So I did my PhD in biochemistry, just a traditional biochemistry wet lab experience. And then I made the switch as a postdoc to education research, and I worked with Jenny Knight at the University of Colorado. And now I'm at Nebraska, where I'm an associate professor, and I run a biology education research lab, and I teach introductory molecular biology. And value, and I actually thought this meant value helping students and helping also people who really like to dig into data and tackling like tough questions. So I think those two things are met really well in the DBER field. In terms of advice, I definitely would echo what Erin just said about talking to people. And then the other thing I was thinking about is how DBER is a very integrative, kind of interdisciplinary field. And we're all like incomplete in different ways. We have strengths in certain areas and areas to grow in others. And so when you're looking at a postdoc, I think it's kind of useful to think about like, what's the strength that you can bring to that postdoc? So maybe you have a really deep knowledge of science. Well, bring that, look for a postdoc where you can use that, but then also look for the position where you can flesh out or grow in another area.
Thank you. Next is Michelle.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. My name is Michelle Smith, and I'm an associate professor at Cornell University in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. I transitioned to DBER as a postdoc as well. So groups like this are really exciting because I can see myself several years ago in all of you. And like Brian Couch, I did my postdoc at the University of Colorado in Boulder. One thing I really value is just being part of a collaborative community. Each of us has a piece that we're interested in, but we often have opportunities to collaborate together on larger projects. And I just think that's one of the really neat things about the DBER field. Since we're all passionate about teaching biology, we have these opportunities to interact. As far as my advice or what to think about, keep doing things like this. Keep being part of these groups where you find out about the career. Keep asking questions. I remember I would run around as a graduate student and say, I want this job. How do I get this job? And thankfully, some people stopped and talked to me. So if you don't quite get uptake on the first try, just keep trying. And thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Next is Sabrina.
Hi, my name is Sabrina Rosemond. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am currently the Assistant Director of the Learning Assistance Program at Florida International University. But by training, I am a biochemist. So my thesis work was on protein folding and thermodynamics. However, I obviously made some transitions there. And in part, due to, I guess, sort of two things, like I enjoy teaching and really wanted to explore that as a way of thinking about problem solving. And then also sort of related to my personal values, or like, you know, I guess why I'm even sort of still in academia is really related to thinking about like equity and equitable, or equity-centered rather, transformations of institutions, and particularly thinking about like courses and science courses as a way forward. To echo Michelle's advice, like I got to or through all of that by actually talking to, there's two people here that I think I spoke to when I was just like, so started asking people questions. So around the time that I was thinking about all of this, there weren't enough, there wasn't a lot of information, right? And I was like, oh, do I need to go back to school? Do I need to do this? And then I just started talking to people, and they would send me to someone, and they would send me to someone else, and they would send me to someone else. And so it was just a lot of talking to strangers. That actually landed me in a pretty good place, actually, like working with John, attending some workshops with Kimberly, and like collaborating and doing some really cool things. So that would be my advice. Talk to everybody and tell everybody what you want to do.
Thank you. Next is John.
Yes. Thank you for being here, and thank you for having me on this panel. I consider this quite an honor. I'm John Matsui. I'm at UC Berkeley. I'm on faculty there in integrated biology. I also direct a program called the Biology Scholars Program, which I co-founded some 28 years ago. It's an equity and inclusion program. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I come from a low-income background. And I think a theme that has run throughout my personal and professional life is that I've been the outsider. In some ways, I feel an outsider on this panel. I've had no formal training in DBER. However, I have done educational research, I have published papers and so on. But what I have valued is actually listening to students. Over the last 28 years, I think a lot of the evidence that I have gathered has come from me doing informal ethnography. I've listened to students, I've listened to their stories about being a STEM major as an undergraduate at UC Berkeley. And from that, I've gotten an idea of what needs to change at Berkeley. Students aren't broken, I think our institutions are. And I think we need to address those sorts of changes in order to have more equitable advising, teaching, and mentoring at our universities. So my advice is to not be role limited. That is to say, oftentimes we place ourselves into these categories. And my training is actually in behavioral ecology, but I've actually learned a whole lot because I've had the courage to step outside of that training to actually learn on the job, mostly as a result of my program. So the value that I have identified is the value of the outsider or the outlier. I think the outsider or outlier can add a lot to any given situation because they see the situation through a different lens with different eyes.
Thank you. And next is Brian.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm Brian Robarczyk. I'm currently Assistant Dean of Academic and Professional Development at the Graduate School at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm also one of the Associate Directors of our IRACTA program at UNC Chapel Hill. Just so happens that I was in the very first cohort of the same program. And so it's great to see other IRACTA postdocs here. That program got started nearly 20 years ago. Luckily, I still am aging well. After that, I got my PhD in molecular biology and in the biomedical sciences, did a postdoc at UNC Chapel Hill. No formal teaching experience as a graduate student because I was in a medical school. And so that's what attracted me to the IRACTA program as it was getting started to give me that balance of teaching and research. Through that process, I discovered that I loved teaching and started doing some research in teaching. And that was kind of dipping my toe into DBER. It was not known as DBER at that time, many years ago. And it's just been great to see the evolution of Saber and all of you now as future faculty and folks who will be doing DBER research. It's very similar to John, I felt like an outsider, very different from my colleagues who were pursuing, traditional faculty careers. So with that, I really value collaboration. I really value interdisciplinary thinking, thinking outside the box. And I would say my piece of advice, just knowing students and in their development, is to take that initiative and to have that growth mindset, to learn from every single opportunity, to seek opportunities for yourself, to really learn and grow from those opportunities. They can only lead to more connections and more informed decisions. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all panelists for introducing yourselves and for keeping the introductions short and sweet. So now we're going to move on to a period of prepared questions. So these are questions that we think would be of interest to all graduate students. And those are, so what are the kinds of things that postdocs do in DBER? What are some transferable skills that graduate students who transition from wet labs to DBER postdocs bring? What are some of the green flags and red flags you look for when people apply or reach out for postdoc opportunities? And how might people foreground the skills they already have, and what kind of training might they expect to get in these postdocs? In the interest of time, panelists, and then again, we're just going to go down the list and have each of you respond with about 1 minute for each response. So we can move on with the first question. What are the kinds of things that postdocs do in DBER? And we'll start with Kimberly.
So just a clarifying question, what kinds of things they do in my lab, if they're a postdoc in my lab?
Yes.
So and about how much time?
About a minute.
Okay, I went really fast last time. Oh, I should say more. So I think in my laboratory, every postdoc looks different. So I have had 12 postdocs in my lab. I have also worked with about 4 or 5 IRACTA postdocs in a more collaborative way, but not necessarily in my lab. And it really is quite tailored to what they want to do when they finish. I really feel like the goal of a postdoc is to open doors to the kinds of change you want to make and the kind of position you want to have, and that's just different for different people. So most everyone in my lab is doing some sort of research. I will say the best research we're doing is not written in a grant. So I don't hire people to execute research I've written in a grant. That's of no interest to me. We come, and some of the most creative ideas are because somebody comes and they have a passion about something, and we figure out how to pursue that. Almost all of our postdocs, I think almost all of our postdocs teach. Usually they co-teach in one of our big introductory biology courses at San Francisco State, because if you can learn to teach 300 people in somewhat equitable and inclusive ways, you can take those skills to lots of different places. Almost all of our postdocs have a chance to mentor undergraduates on research projects so that they get a chance to try that out. Based on feedback from postdocs, almost all of our postdocs go to faculty meetings, so they know what the hell awaits them in that sort of sector of their job. And the overarching goal of postdocs in my lab is so to have the kinds of experiences so that when you get to the kind of job you want, it's not a surprise. That you've learned to balance a bunch of stuff and manage a bunch of stuff and network, and so it's really that preparation. And I will add on that I never intended to be a professor. That was not a goal of mine. I worked in K-12 science education as a staff person for a long time. And most of the skills that allow me to do, I think, really great work come from my years as a staff person. And so everybody in my lab learns a lot about how to write an email and how to organize a meeting and a lot of things that are not, maybe people wouldn't necessarily think are part of research, but are what allow us to do research with humans in really effective, inclusive ways. I guess I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you. Next up is Tessa. If you could tell us what postdocs do in your lab, or if you have anything to add.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just, to avoid repeating things that Kimberly said, I'll just focus on the experiences I've had mentoring postdocs, which is a little bit different. So give me just, sorry, it's after work hours here, so children call. So I have had postdocs exclusively on research grant. Looks like that can really depend on the grant and what the postdoc is sort of bringing into that. And so sometimes that looks like coming into a relatively well articulated project, but then figuring out how to make it happen. There's a lot of details that don't go into a grant proposal and that then have to be figured out on the ground. And so sometimes it comes in and is bringing reality to a kind of a general vision. Other times, there's a little more open-endedness in what could be explored in a grant, and someone can come in and think and read a little bit to think how they might fit something into a kind of umbrella project. And I think there's generally room, as I think Kimberly was indicating, also for kind of tailoring positions to what people are interested in. And at a university, there's a lot of to pursue other kinds of opportunities.
Thank you. Erin, go ahead.
Thanks. So in my group, or our group, I also use grant funding to fund postdoc salaries primarily, but I see that as a valuable opportunity for them to learn knowledge and skills related to a project that's already pretty well defined. I agree with Tessa that it isn't necessarily fleshed out in detail, but that comprises part of their work, sort of a skill or knowledge development ground. But then I also try to carve out time for that postdoc to develop their own research agenda if they intend to go on to research. And actually, most of the postdocs who've worked with me actually have gone on to lead research careers. And so that's been really important for them to develop their own research agenda that's independent from my own work that they can then take with them into whatever their next position is. If that position involves teaching, if that position might involve undergraduate research mentoring, then I also try to create space for that. So echoing the ideas of tailoring, but providing both support for learning and freedom to develop their own research interests and agenda.
Okay. Thank you. Next is.
So the benefit of going last year is that I've got a little bit of time to think, but also that some of the good stuff was taken. So I jotted down some real kind of day-to-day things. So like Erin and Tessa, the postdocs I've hired, with the exception of one, have been funded off of grants. And I do want to talk to Kimberly about how you fund a postdoc without a grant. So we'll have a sidebar afterwards. And I agree that ideally there's the grant, it lays out a project, but there's a lot of implementation details that still have to be worked out. And so there's still plenty of space to do a lot of original thinking, and also to be thinking about their own future directions.
That all the postdocs in my lab are funded from grants. So they're funded from NIH grants, HHMI grants, NSF grants. I think that I had a mentor one time who was really great, and they taught me that grants are not contracts, and so grants like lay out a lot of space, and that so everybody's funded from a grant.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. We can move on to the next question. So the question is, what are some transferable skills that graduate students who transition from wet labs to DBER postdocs bring? And first up to respond to that, we have Michelle.
Thanks. So I think the good news is there are a lot of transferable skills that grad students bring, and instead of thinking about maybe what you're lacking, thinking about what you can bring, I think is really important as you look for postdoc opportunities. So just some basic things, statistics, ability to analyze data, writing, experimental design, so forth and so on. And when I interview postdocs, I often, in grants, we often put in preliminary data sets to kind of indicate to the funding agencies we can probably accomplish what we're proposing. I usually give them the data sets ahead of time and just say, what would you do with this the pile of data in front of you? What would you do next? How would you change it? What do you like and don't like? And it gives a really nice opportunity for people to get beyond just what they think DBER postdocs do and bring themselves and their experiences to a new type and set of data.
Thank you. We have Sabrina.
Yeah, I guess it's probably going to sound fairly similar, but right, like, you are in, if you're a postdoc or a grad student currently in a wet lab, right, like you have some level of curiosity, and a part of getting a PhD, or essential to get a PhD, is sort of thinking about problems and problem solving. And as I mentioned, I think in my introduction, like that was when I was thinking about what I wanted to do. I was like, I want to, go into education, but I still want to ask and answer questions, right? They just weren't going to be about proteins and cooperativity or whatever, right? And so I think just like centering that, like, and thinking in the same way that you think about like what is of interest to you in the wet lab work that you do, right? What types of questions are interesting to you, right? Or and some of it could be like class related specifically to thinking about course design. Some of it may be thinking more about like programs. But you know how to ask questions, right? They're just different questions, and then following up those questions with, being able to do the background research that you need to do, right? Like, you know how to do that. And you'll have to do it, when you go into education research. And again, right, like some of the very like basic skills of like, if you know how to analyze data and interpret quantitative data, right? Qualitative data may not necessarily be like, a part of what you do currently, but like, again, just sort of going back to the like, curiosity being something that can move or push you forward.
Thank you. John, go ahead.
So I'm going to say a few words that are quite a bit different than what has been said. Being in a wet lab, you are an insider to science, and you have a lot of information about the cultural context of science, which I think is really, really critical in terms of your work as a future DBER postdoc and researcher. That's the cultural context. And you understand, if you think about it, the group dynamics, the lab group as a unit in science. You also understand how sometimes evidence is not used in decision making. And I think that's really important in terms of the research that you do. If your research is going to be translated from findings into action, oftentimes conventional wisdom drives decisions. And that's an important bit of information to know about regarding the culture of science. And also, I think you should draw on this experience, but not overgeneralize, because not everybody, labs are like families, they're quite different. Institutions are different, and institutional context matters. The context of lab group matters, and so on. But I think you have a wealth of cultural knowledge in terms of science.
Thank you. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I guess the only two things I would offer in addition to what the other panelists have said, one big thing is writing. Those successful graduate students and postdocs that I've worked with over the years have been just amazingly productive writers. They put time into their calendars to get it done, and it just makes them progress much easier and quicker through their program.
Question. Which is, what are some of the green flags and red flags you look out for when people apply or reach out for postdoc opportunities? And while the slides catch up, the first person to respond to that is Kimberly. So green flags and red flags that you look for when people apply for postdoc opportunities.
All right. Wow. I feel like I'm interviewing for a job. This is stressful. I want to say that a green flag I look out for, which relates to the last question, and I just want to reiterate it, is we really value cultural, linguistic assets that people bring to our lab. And so I think more so if you feel like, hey, like I maybe don't have strengths in some of the things that other people are talking about, like we really look for people who have divergent perspectives. And so this relates to what John said. I think John and I share this, like I feel like I'm an outsider. Right now, I've been a professor for 17 years. I discover some invisible rule about higher education like every week. And so that positionality of like understanding, so having a relationship with biology education and having things that you both maybe loved about it or were frustrating and that relate to your personal cultural wealth, I think is a really key green flag. I don't think we have red flags per se in our lab. I think we're always looking to help people to be able to do what they want to do next. I think that I encounter a lot of people and I say, oh, why would you like to, come and, study or what do you want to do next? And they say, I want to be a tenure track professor at a Research One institution. And so I think one of the things that I encourage everyone that I talk to think about is not what exact job you want to have, but what change do you want to make in the world? So I made a lot of change as a staff person, right? I've made a lot of change, I think, as a professor, but you can make change in lots of positions. And it's why I really appreciate that we have a lot of different types of people in different positions on this panel. I don't think I can tell you of the 12 people in my lab, some of them are at Centers for Teaching and Learning. Some of them are at small liberal arts colleges. They don't primarily do research. Some of them run research labs. And so I think that you can pursue a lot of different positions and careers with a postdoc, and you can make a lot of change in the world, not necessarily having one particular type of position. So that probably gives you a sense of maybe the kinds of green flags or red flags. I'm not sure if I can answer that question. The other thing I'll say is that I don't choose postdocs in my lab because there's so much implicit bias. So we always have a committee of people. So oftentimes people come and they're trying to talk to me about a postdoc, like that happens in traditional science. And I will say that we kind of actively don't do that. So we put out a position announcement and we do a search. And that's how we get folks. So right now we have 3 awesome postdocs, and we have the good problem that our postdocs get jobs really quickly. Go team. So we'll probably be advertising, soon, but we don't do it kind of one-on-one. It's not my decision. It's like a committee of people who work on the projects. And we're always just looking for, people want to learn the kinds of things that we do. So I have wonderful colleagues on this panel that do types of research that our lab doesn't do. And so I will say, for every person who's come to my lab, anyone who has interviewed and we don't have a position for, I usually spend a fair amount of time trying to get them sort of placed in other labs. And so it's a really great field, the biology education field in particular, I think, very supportive. Like if it's not a good, the situation here, not a good match somehow for you, then like we tend to try and point people in other directions. I don't know if I'm quite answering the question, but I did my best.
You did. We got some good information out of that. Okay, next, Tessa, if you'd like to add anything.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with Kimberly that this is like sort of a tough question. I think it depends which time I'm hiring a postdoc, like what's the sort of work that I'm going to be asking someone to collaborate on. But I definitely, I guess if I'm trying to generalize a little bit, I'm definitely always looking for a really like deep curiosity about what, the system we're working in. So I usually am investigating either faculty or systems in which faculty work, like departments and institutions, and not everyone's interested in that, right? Some people get into DBER specifically because they really, really want to understand students and student thinking, and that's not the kind of work that I typically do in my lab. So I get really excited when I talk to someone and there's, talking about how it's all about the system and we can't change anything till we change the system. And I'm like, okay, this is your interests lie in the space that will, I think, be a good fit with the lab. So I think fit, and I think that might be an annoying thing to hear maybe when you're on the job market, because what does fit mean? But I think that's true, right? Like I'm looking for people who it feels like I could provide opportunities that would help them get to the next stage, and they could bring strengths to the project that we really need to make it a success. And so sometimes that's really quantitative skills, sometimes it's really qualitative skills, sometimes it's background in a particular theoretical area, sometimes it's not. That's something that can be learned on the job, so to speak. So I do think we try to be really clear in job ads what we're looking for. Like a lot of thought goes into writing those. So I think that should give you some good clues about what particular positions are looking for.
Okay, thank you. Erin, if you'd like to add anything.
Thanks. I think that maybe the things that are green flags to me are that someone is willing to take a learning stance and comes to a problem with a sense of humility. And a red flag that would be a counter to that is a sense of arrogance, viewing learning and teaching as something to be fixed and that they have the solution. Sort of deficit model thinking is a red flag to me. Another green flag to me is, and I'll echo what Brian said, that I think writing skills are just super helpful. And because of my own limited bandwidth, I feel like I sometimes can't help people with writing. And so I can edit something, but I can't do writing for people. And so I often ask for writing samples so that I have a sense that I feel like their writing is within a realm that I can help. And that speaks to, I think, a point Tessa made about fit. And I might frame it as that someone's needs are needs that I can meet. if they have needs beyond what I can meet, either through the projects they're going to be working on or through my own sort of approaches or skill set or knowledge as a mentor, then I think that it's not a good fit. So those are the kinds of things that I think about when I'm trying to find a postdoc that might be a fit for a group.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Brian.
Yeah, I think the three preceding people did a really good job of summarizing everything. I would kind of echo some of the thoughts about, like, it depends on the position, and oftentimes there's sort of a key thing or two that is needed for that position, and so some of the people who are applying are going to be better able to meet that need because of their backgrounds. They might have a lot of background in teaching and working with students, or maybe they've worked a lot with faculty, or maybe they have a robust quantitative background or something like that, and there's just an alignment between that background and then the needs of the project. And I think the purpose there too is, like, it's not that everybody couldn't learn all these different things. It's just that with postdocs, a lot of times the timeline is tight, and so you feel like you want to know that they're gonna be able to get in and make progress soon and be able to complete the project within the sort of funding timeline. The other thing that's kind of a green light or green flag is just kind of a belief that the position is lining up with their goals, that it's going to set them up to achieve what they want to achieve, and that kind of just makes sense. Like, if they want to teach at this kind of an institution, or if they want to do research in that kind of way, that this is going to give them those skills to do that. I would say kind of similar to what Erin was saying in terms of red flags, sometimes I have caught people will kind of imagine that DBER is easy, or that it's like, oh, I want out of bench science, and so DBER is kind of this alternative path that, is maybe a little easier. And it's definitely very demanding in different ways. And you have to, if you're not prepared for that, it would be a rude awakening.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to the last prepared question, which is, how might people foreground the skills they already have, and what kind of training might they expect to get? And so to answer that first, we have Michelle.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree that our job ads are really specific and really laying out what we're looking for. And so taking those seriously, answering each one specifically, both in the application, and it's a good hint about when you do Zoom interviews or in-person interviews, the things we're going to ask about. Thinking about specific answers, how do you work with other people? How have you collaborated with students or faculty? What do you know about statistics or qualitative analysis? And having examples ready to go and share, I think helps foreground those skills. As far as the training, it's really different depending on the different projects. And so one of the things that's nice about joining a DBER lab is that you often have people with a variety of expertise. So somebody who knows a lot about qualitative analysis or quantitative or has a different approach. And so I think what you can expect is to be welcomed into a community where we don't have all the answers, but we know somebody who has an answer, either as a direct collaborator on a project or another friend or something like that. And so I think the skills are quite flexible, but you can also get at what you want. And I'll also say we spend a lot of time with the statistics help desk at my university. And so you can get help, in broader ways, depending on your analysis. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we have Sabrina. Sorry, you're muted.
It's funny, I'm usually the person telling other people they're muted. What goes around comes around, what are you gonna do? But, so I think in terms of the skills, right? So I guess I should say that, like, my postdoc was a slightly different than most people's. Like, I was in chemistry, actually. It happened sort of by accident. I also was like doing that postdoc while also working with John in the Biology Scholars Program. And so maybe I might focus on, like, the training you might expect to get, right? So, like, I was sort of flexible about, like, how I would go about getting into science education. So for me, that training included, like, if in my work with BSP, learning about how to learn from students about their experiences, right? So if like, because my identity here is centered around like equity, right? Then like learning about that, right? At the same time, I was working on a course redesign for a gatekeeping course in chemistry, right? And like the population of students was overlapping, right? So that was training I got to like do very much on the job. Like, how do you talk to students? And not that I didn't know how to talk to people, right? But like, how do you really hear them and make a safe space for particularly people who are having, right? I am a Black woman, but like the students in BSP were coming from backgrounds that I didn't have intersections with, like families who were migrant workers, et cetera, right? And so like preparing myself for understanding the broad scope of individuals that, you know, if I claim that I want to support you, then I need to know, have some bearing and like, you know, expand my my space of empathy, right? And so I think in terms of thinking about the training, I guess my offer here is for you all is to consider like both the training that you might get directly from your mentors, but also like in the other places or spaces on campus that are doing things that are aligned with the type of work that you want to ultimately do. So if that is thinking about justice, equity, and inclusion, where are the places or spaces who are the people that are protecting those students really? Because that's actually like the work that they're doing. It's not just that they're doing program management, they're providing protection. If it is like, you know, like other aspects, right? Like trying to find those people to, I guess, have a more holistic training for yourself. And also building those connections with folks will, I think, help you in the long run, no matter sort of what job you want. Because if whatever change you want to make in education, you're going to need more than just you.
Okay,
Thank
thank you. Yes, it did. Unfortunately, we're running a little low on time, so I'm going to ask our next two panelists to just please add anything that they want to add to the answers that have already been given. I'm sorry. So John, go ahead.
So I like something that Kimberly said earlier. Don't think of a particular position, but think about maybe the change you want to make. That just really caught my ear. And so in terms of how to foreground your skills, I would say, let's do a little reverse engineering. Think about the change you want to make, and then look at the skills you've acquired and how transferable are those skills that you've developed in the laboratory, as a TA, and so on, and foreground those skills because you have a target in mind.
Thank you. And next up we have Brian.
Sure, I'll just keep it short, but just reflecting on the idea of promoting your skills or foregrounding your skills, I would say being very reflective about your teaching experience, and that could also be in a mentoring situation too. So what are you learning about teaching and learning through those different experiences and how they might translate then to a DBER postdoc, for example. Being really thoughtful about what you're doing and how you're doing it can really play a strong role as a graduate student in order to make improvements in your own teaching that can lead you to maybe some of the questions or areas of interest that you might take in a DBER postdoc.
Okay, thank you. So the next part of this is an open Q&A, and for that, I'm going to turn it back over to Christy.
Thank you so much, everyone. Those are such inspiring answers. And Anu, thank you for running all of that. So we have about 7 minutes left. And so I'm hoping we could get 1 or 2 questions in for our panelists for our open Q&A. So if you want to raise your hand or feel free to type your question in the chat. Oh, here we go. We already have one ready to go. Thank you, Gordon. A question for anyone. What are some of the main places to look for DBER or DBER-like positions? And what are useful keywords for the search process?
And any panelists who would like to answer if you would raise your hand and we can call on you individually, so there's no confusion.
Oh, we've got some answers in the chat. There we go. We've got Saver Listserv, the DBER listserv like Sabres. There's a chemistry education one managed by ACS. NARST. Awesome. Looks like we have a really good list. Well, let's see. I think we could probably get one more question at least in real quick. Does anyone have any other questions? I'm just going to read a few more of these answers. And then we have Anu who has a question. There we go. Go ahead, Anu.
So I always hear that it's not necessary to wait around to see like job ads, and that you should just reach out to people whom you want to talk to. But it's really hard to know what to say when you reach out. So if you have any advice for people who are trying to reach out directly to PIs for postdocs, please, I'd like to hear that.
Kimberly, yes, please.
I just want to echo what my wise colleague Sabrina said, which is talk to lots of people you don't know. So I wouldn't wait personally for job announcements. I think a great way to figure out what you want to do is to arrange a 20, 30-minute call with people whose papers you're interested in, or Google around the kinds of things you're interested in, see who's working on that. I think that I talk to lots of people who don't end up coming to my lab to do a postdoc. Just because you talk to someone doesn't mean you're applying to their lab. And there's just so much really kindness and wisdom in this community that if you can at least find yourself to a couple of people, either via papers or by websites, and craft a nice email, always end with a question: when can we schedule a 20-minute Zoom call? I send my own students and postdocs out to do that all the time, and that's how they get great information. That's actually how they get jobs. So
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Anu.
No, I was just going to say thank you for that answer. It was very helpful. And I guess Michelle had something to say.
I just wanted to say, we all often get emails from people who are interested in our career trajectories. That's usually a nice way to start off the email. You have an interest in something that they do. And, sometimes if things get busy, if it's a busy part of the semester, we'll often suggest that people talk to our current postdocs. And just know that's just a nice step in the process and gets you information. And it's another way to connect with the lab.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I think we should probably wrap up. Kimberly, did you have your hand raised again? I can't tell if it's still up. Sorry, I wanted to make sure we called on everyone. Okay. Yes, everyone, please unmute and make some noise for our fantastic panelists. Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here today. So we're going to have some breakout sessions coming up real quick. These are the current rooms. So for everyone that signed up, please try to make sure you go to the rooms that you said you were interested in. Yeah, oh, and thank you, Liz. Liz dropped the link into the chat again for everyone. And so just really quick, thank you all for coming. You can learn more about SABRE at this website on these slides, which I think we can post also as well into the chat. Yes, and it looks like we have Kimberly putting her email in the chat. So I'm sure everyone is happy to receive emails if you have additional questions for these panelists.
Thanks, Christy. That's awesome. And so the same Weebly site that hosts the home page to our professional development committee, we will drop these slides, and any of the faculty panelists who give us the go-ahead, we can find a private way to list their, so attendees will be able to access their emails, but they won't be available at large. And so Liz just dropped into the chat the Google Doc that has, again, the breakout sessions. And I would just remind everyone, so we have about an hour coming up which is an opportunity for current graduate students to connect with current postdocs. And so we would, we've kind of pre-sorted folks, you know, so that there are particular postdocs in particular rooms, but you would be welcome to move around. So don't feel like if you join one room right off the bat that you have to stay there for the remainder of the time. So we just want to thank everyone again, and hope everyone stays safe and well and has a productive semester. So thanks for taking the time out of your day, and we'll just have another round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
You want us to leave now?
Much.
Thank you. I'm so sorry my internet was not reliable today, but I'm glad the panel continued and the committee held up the backup slides. Thank you, Sonia.
And Dax, I should have closed my curtains like you said you did in the beginning, because about partway through I had the light coming in and I was like, oh, they had the right idea.
Yeah, well, it was so lovely to see you. Sabrina, I haven't seen you in a while. It was great to hear about what you're up to, and hope we get to catch up again soon. And thank you, Kimberly and John, for joining as well.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna request that if you could give a pep talk to all the people that are here, like, I mean, when they leave, like, I feel like there are no barriers to doing a postdoc in biology education research. And I think that maybe because I'm in a master's grading institution, or maybe I'm who I am, I don't know, but I just would not want anyone to feel like they needed anything to like try and go forward in this field. And so you can blame it on me, but please, I think people bring all sorts of assets that have nothing to do with like the technicalities of what DBER people do. And I would want them to really see that in themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of threw myself at it. It worked out. It was just like literally talking to so many people, and then it was like, oh, I looked up. I mean, not looked up, right? I talked to someone, and they happened to like make a position for me, even though they weren't necessarily looking for a postdoc, and then just like moving from there.
Anyway, the three of us here are still sort of here. We're on a row, but I think that I'm trying to echo what I think Sabrina and John would say too. That the positionality of being an outsider to me is a much bigger asset than anything else that gets listed. All right,
absolutely.
I guess I'm gonna leave now.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Kimberly.
Thanks for hosting.
Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye, Sabrina.
Bye, John.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.